Call meeting order. Ask him to call the roll.
All right. Got the recorder going? Chair Harry Meyer.
Yep.
Vice Chair Gary Delvaux.
Here.
Jim Bloomreck. Here. Alderman Joe Moore is going to be a few minutes late. Melanie Parma.
Here.
Matt Schuler.
Here.
And Tom Weber as introduced.
Ask for a motion to approve the agenda as sent out.
So moved. Second.
Gary, second by Matt. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I ask for approval of the minutes that were sent out to all of us.
So moved.
Gary, and second by
Second.
Melanie. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Communications, consideration with possible action on the communication from December 6, 2017 to the Common Council by Alderman Zimmel on behalf of Donald Bartofsky that the city consider constructing a set of decorative metal arches identifying the dual entrances of the historic area of the Broadway Business District. I imagine we'll refer that to staff.
Yes, please.
And
Make a motion to refer to staff.
all right, motion by Gary and second by Jim to refer to staff. Those in favor say aye.
Just a second, do we ever have discussion on things? I don't know.
Yeah. All right, go ahead, Jim.
With your pleasure, please.
Sorry about that.
We didn't vote yet, so you're...
I assume that you're going to refer it to staff, but
Yeah.
Mr. Bartokowski is here, and he would like to address the committee of what he had in mind. And this is, I think, an excellent idea. Something to really give definition to the historic Broadway district. And I have seen it in other areas. I know Military Avenue had made a similar request a couple years ago. And I thought that was a good idea too. Not that I want to stray from the subject, but they wanted some kind of entrance from like Lombardi Avenue that would show that there was a business district that way. So in that vein, something that would be some arches that would have a historic look to them, not something modernistic, but something that had a good patina to it, something that would complement the district. I think Mr. Bartokowski.
I just want to say, if you're comparing this to military, they came in here, it was referred to staff worked with them, and it came back here.
Your Honor, I'm not arguing with about anything, but normally when people have a communication, they like to explain something about what their ideas are. And if you have a problem with that, Mr. Mayor, I don't know what your problem is.
We refer communications all the time at council's guide. People never talk about them, they get referred, and then they're talked about.
Yeah, that's right, it was referred to here.
Right.
Why do you insist on arguing about everything?
I just want to follow the process and be fair.
Do you think it's improper for people to introduce what proposal they're going to have? I want the media to please recognize this. It's common on every committee.
People have to disrupt the process. That it is. But all right, we'll allow it.
We have communication.
We like Mr. Bartokowski. He's a good person, so yeah, we'd like to hear from him.
Well, then why are you objecting?
I want to hear from him.
Well, I'm introducing it for him. As you know, you made the rules that said that things have to be introduced to Alderman.
Come on, let's move on, guys.
I make a motion to open the meeting.
Do you understand how this is totally out of order?
I make a motion to open up the meeting.
Motion second to open the meeting to public discussion. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Could you give your name and address, please?
Yeah, it's David Bartokowski, business owner here in town. My business address is 900 Cedar Street, Green Bay 54301. I have another building on Broadway at 159 North Broadway. My tenants there own the Prohibition Spirits cigar and lounge over there. I just wanted to present this idea, and I didn't even know. I didn't think. Trust me, I wouldn't be here if I knew it was that simple and it was going to get sent up somewhere else. I don't know how this works, but I just this idea has been in my head for a number of years now, hoping to identify the special area in which I started a business 20 years ago in the Broadway district. One of the lucky enough to be one of the early ones out there, and very glad I did. That area is very special. It's one of the few places that has original architecture left, the old buildings in that area. This will fit in right with what you guys are planning to do, and I love that idea as well. The stadium down on South Broadway is a great idea, and I've been an advocate for that for years as well. Mayor Schmidt knows that, and I've attempted to make that happen as well, and I'm just glad that's happening. But I'd like to see the area identified as being special. And, you know, you go down to the 3rd Ward, and there's these arches down there in the Milwaukee area, and, you know, and it identifies a special place in our in their community, and I want that to happen here in our community as well. We have a lot going on in Broadway. We've got new businesses and things happening down there, and I just want other people to understand that we are just as special as what's happening over at Lambeau Field right now, too. That is another of my concerns. Being a business owner, there's a lot of stuff happening over there, and you know, there's only a certain amount of dollars that come into the city of Green Bay, and I don't want it all funneled in that direction out there. I want them to know that we are special, and by putting up some arches, I think, and identifying that, I think will help in that whole area there in that community, just how special we are. And it's very simple. That's all I wanted to have it considered and hopefully looked at.
All right.
Great idea.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Make a motion to move back to regular business.
Second.
Motion, second, to return regular to business, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. We already have a motion and second then to reserve this proposal to staff, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. And so be it. Old business, none. New business. Where do you start out with number 2?
So what I would recommend doing is taking 2, 3, 4, and 5 and putting them all on the table at once.
I want the city attorney to
Since
tell us
they're-
that's okay to do that.
You can take them all at once. What he's recommending is that you, what I'm hearing is that you're gonna vote on them separately.
Yeah.
But you're discussing them all.
We can discuss all of them at the same time, but vote separately.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, and I think that would be appropriate, given they're all intertwined projects. Also, when it comes to the closed session, we don't have to keep going in or out
Right.
if there's one way
Good.
to discuss, just so long as when you do go into closed session, we're
Okay.
referring to those.
Okay, under new business and consideration of possible action on development agreement with the City of Green Bay and the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Green Bay for the Shipyard Outdoor Events Center, 100 West Main Street, 515 South Broadway, 517 South Broadway, 525 South Broadway, 531 South Broadway, 613 South Broadway, South Pearl Street, 505 South Broadway, 419 South Maple, 511, 513 South Broadway, 239 Arch Street, 101 Bridge Street, 110, 119 Bridge Street, 401 South Broadway, 420 South Broadway, 402 South Broadway, parcels and numbers, all kinds of them. Those in favor?
We're in favor of the agenda item.
All right, fine.
All right, and then. if you
You're in
want to-
charge, Kevin.
Well, you want to put 3, 4, and 5 also on the table?
Right. Oh, yeah, that should include 2, 3, 4, and 5, all on the same subject.
So also then, consideration possible action on the management agreement for the Outdoor Event Center with Broadway Events LLC for the Outdoor Event Center at 100 West Mason Street. Number 4, consideration of possible action on a development agreement with Mark Scogan for an indoor performance venue at South Broadway, 505 South Broadway, 511, 515 South Broadway, 515 South Broadway, and 517 South Broadway. And then number 5, consideration with possible action on development agreement with NBC Sports Club for a full-service restaurant at 100 West Mason Street. So 2, 3, 4, 5, all on the table.
Good.
So, here we are again, talking about our shipyard project. And what we really have today, we feel, is a package that really moves this forward. And this has been discussed here several times, both openly and in closed session. Trying to work to make sure that we are doing a comprehensive redevelopment project in the South Broadway neighborhood. I think we, as staff, feel that we are in a place, based on comments from RDA and based on comments from council, are in a place to move this project forward. So, I think, again, we've always talked about this is a comprehensive redevelopment project for the South Broadway neighborhood, 4 distinct zones. And we talk about the south, building an outdoor event center. We talk about the north parcel, where we talked about high-density housing, but I think we'll discuss a little more today. Potential for some mixed-use redevelopment in this area, along with also on Broadway, mixed-use redevelopment, and then in the west, the neighborhood enhancement. This neighborhood, again, that's been kind of cut off from the rest of the city, and really just a lot of great housing stock, but just could use some infusion from us and some other reasons to help move this piece forward.
Kevin, do we know about how many people live in that district?
So I would say about 300. There's 90 single-family parcels
90 units.
In there, and with just averages 2.5. It's about a neighborhood of about 300, 350 people. So what we have on the agenda today to discuss. Number 2 is the development agreement, which is RDA approved. Council put some contingencies on it, so we're coming back here with an amended development agreement that reflects those contingencies and also some additional parts of the project. Thank you, Chair Meyer, for going through all those addresses up front. But as you can see, I mean, there's a lot of small parcels, but there's a lot of big parcels in here as well. So this deals with the development agreement. Number 3 is the management agreement for basically who is going to operate that outdoor event center. Number 4 deals with the development agreement for an indoor performance venue. And number 5 is a development agreement for a full-service restaurant. So, again, I don't need to dive in too much, why we're doing this in terms of, what it does for the community, in terms of, safety, health, connectivity, and really making Green Bay that destination place in terms of offering amenities that nobody else in this region has. So if we want to take a look at, and I'll just kind of give the high-level details of these, and then if we want to go through and dig into them one by one, I think it'd be appropriate to do that. I think just broadly, I wanted to start out just kind of how they're all tied together and then what each piece means.
Kevin,
So
I have a question.
Sure.
Have the proposed developers already agreed to this, and that they support the agreement?
So we are in a place for that for items 2, 3, and 4. We are almost there with 5, which is why we have closed session on it in terms of there's a few negotiation points that I think there's still a little difference of opinion on, and I would like to discuss that in closed session and get RDA's direction on
Just
how we're
on
going to
5.
close that gap. Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So for the development agreement for the outdoor event center, I mean, here's the piece of the parcel we're looking at, 100 West Mason Street. And the latest concept plan looks at providing that outdoor event center. And again, we're sticking to what we've talked about before. 2,500 seats, capacity for about 4,000 for sporting events, about 8,000 for concerts, festivals, and other community events. We'd like to have that multi-purpose artificial turf field so it can really expand to the seasons, go early in spring, late in fall. It also looks at some state-of-the-art amenities, scoreboards, hospitality areas, dugouts. And then on the northwest corner along the third baseline is a spot reserved for a full-service restaurant. A little bit different than concept we talked before, that the indoor performance venue will not be located on this parcel, but this parcel will just have the stadium and the restaurant. This allows for a little bit more breathing room, if you will, and in terms of being able to make some additional parking, right at the stadium entrance itself, which can serve on game day, but then also provide service for the restaurant. So in that development agreement, you'll notice in the amended version that the cost has gone up, and I wanted to explain a little bit what those costs involve and why we've seen the increase since the last time we've looked at it. So all in, it's a $13.5 million project. That includes outdoor event center, waterfront improvements, and parking improvements. And in this agreement, we say, all right, in order to move this forward, something early on that came was, look, we want to keep this off the tax levy, so we need to create a new tax increment district in this area, roughly between Ashland and the water, Arnter Bridge Street south to 9th Street. And then we also need to contribute at least $1 million to the neighborhood over the next 3 years. Some reasons for the additional cost between last time and then this time, if you go to the next slide, if you look at the uses, the stadium still contemplates $9.5 million, which is what we talked about last time. I think further discussion with Big Top and in terms of their consultant that they've been working with for that stadium design and cost, and again, further talk with environmental and engineers about what's going to cost to build on that site. We feel comfortable with that number. The other money for the waterfront amenities and the parking has increased. First of all, and this has come through further discussion with both Big Top, Mark Scogan, and Nduzi's, and also the neighborhood in terms of like what we're doing for that and what we'd like to see happen in terms of incentives to get projects moving. The waterfront improvements, basically going to be expanding the trail a little bit, so make sure to go around both portions of the slip. The original agreement just contemplated a trail around 100 West Mason Street. We want to make sure that this trail also goes behind the slip all the way around the northern parcel and connects to Bridge Street and Arndt Street, so that people who are using those crossings can also safely get down. Also potentially provide for a little wider trail or more space along the slip itself. Look, I don't want to build it too small that, if it gets crowded, say 10-foot trail, but maybe 20 feet are needed in those areas right around the slip, especially on event days. It also increases the number of parking spaces from 400 to 900. This is probably the biggest cost increase here. As you noticed in the parcels, part of this also includes the acquisition of the Badger sheet metal property. That is the parcels identified, the 402, 420, South Broadway, and the Maple Street parcel. Basically, we would like to take this facility for parking. I think it's important for us to secure this property in terms of being able to control the long-term development interests. We talked, and one of the issues that had come up was, okay, well, where are we going to park all these people for bigger events? I think, look, we handle a farmer's market with 5,000, 8,000 people pretty successfully without a designated parking spot. Nonetheless, in terms of just creating a new space and getting people used to patterns, for these amenities, it's perhaps good for us to kind of secure some, what I call medium-term to long-term parking. And so with that, we would look at acquiring the Badger sheet metal property. That building comes down, and in its place, at least 350 parking stalls.
Is that vacant, that building?
There are some tenants in there now, but the leases could be ended early, and we can get moving on that very quickly. In terms of other parking options, we looked at maybe potentially parking the north side of the slip. But as we've talked about, with interest in that, I don't want to have the RDA go through and put in a parking lot that in 2 years we're going to rip out because somebody wants to develop there. Just look also past practice. It's not good to build parking right on the waterfront if we didn't learn our lesson already from the east side. Let's not do it again on the west side. So it provides basically parking there. We're also looking at doing some additional parking under Mason Street between Ashland Avenue and Maple Street. That area, just like the rest of elevated Mason, is already flat, it's graded, could be easily converted to parking with some asphalt and lighting. It really does make a nice connection to the stadium. And based on the reconfiguration of the south parcel and with West Mason, we're able to get some additional spots in there as well. So we feel pretty comfortable that with the additional cost of asphalt for doing the parking and also stormwater management, landscaping, lighting, all those things, and the additional property acquisitions with Badger sheet metal, and then also this contemplates us picking up the last piece that we don't own there, and that's the WPS triangle, that little triangle between Arndt Street and Broadway. All of that adds pretty substantial in terms of those costs, but with that, we're more than doubling the amount of parking spaces that we said we're going to provide. The the other piece, just in terms of that acquisition, the parking that we're providing there, really will service all of these amenities. It'll serve the concert venue, it'll serve the stadium, and it could potentially, depending on the use, serve some of the uses on the north side of the parcel. Part of the agreement that we'll talk about with Mr. Scogan, providing some use of that parking lot, 350 spaces. But I think also long-term, some consideration, if there is some room on that site, we could have some additional development opportunities, or look at relocating that parking, or figuring out other ways to use that, basically discussions between the parties long-term. So, as you know, the easiest time to get in and secure property is before things happen. So I feel and we discussed more in closed session, that it's in our best financial interest to put this as part of the package right now.
David, where would Mark Scogan's facility be located?
I'm going to get to that one. Yep, and show you where he's going to be at. The other piece is just further discussion with the railroad, CN. We've been discussing with them again about potential for crossing at Clinton Street. We just want to make sure that we're allocating enough funds. If we do get permission to do that full crossing there, that we have funds available to do that. In the short term, I think we just looked at some safety improvements to the existing crossings at Mason, Arndt, and Bridge Street. just to make sure that, if we have a lot of people coming in and out, safety is number one. So we really believe, those things are going to be sufficient to induce not only this development, starting off with the performance venue and the restaurant, but really also get the ball rolling for things longer down the line. Waterfront improvements that are there for the public, and for basically developers who would be looking at the north side or pieces on Broadway. With that then, the sources still remain the same of the operator is willing to put in $1 million worth of equity up front of the project, and we've talked about in terms of some of the upfront costs of design and moving that forward. $500,000 from the stadium district. And what we'll be looking at is $12 million of public financing. I know we've discussed Huntington Bank has been interested in this. I think our bond council is still also interested in this piece. And then look, what we would do is commit to the city if moving ahead. We don't want to draw money before we need it. And given the timetable, we probably wouldn't be looking at drawing money until March or June of next year. But we'd like the opportunity to basically bring back the most competitive financing tool for the city, whether that be bonding or whether it be a private financial institution. So part of this agreement also contemplates saying, look, we've got to put $1 million in the neighborhood, working with Assistant Director Rear Wig and our community investment manager, Mr. Pape. We feel pretty confident that, look, in funds that we've got coming in the next few years, this we can achieve in terms of, again, making a big splash in this neighborhood, targeting funds, again, a variety of products, expanding on things we do now, giving homeowners the tools they need to fix up their properties, giving people who buy rental properties the opportunity to convert them into home ownership, and also additional funds for new products in this area. This is very important that we tie these two things together. So with that, the development agreement, just in terms of the timeline, basically by the end of the year, we had to meet the conditions about tying up those other development deals. If approved, we would look at getting concept plans done in March of 2018 with construction docs and a budget by June of next year, within a completion date of March of 2019. So tied to this is, if we're going to build a facility, we need an operator to manage the facility. And so sent out was also a proposed management agreement. I know we discussed this back in October confidentially in terms of where we're at with the negotiations. I think we brought back what we feel is a very fair deal for both the RDA and the operator, and it's something that manages this in a very competitive way that really both parties can benefit from it. So I just think, again, in terms of what we're going to be doing here, it's very important, again, stressing multi-season, multi-sport, multi-purpose facility. These are all things we've talked about before. Again, yes, it's a home for the Bullfrogs, but also between soccer, college, university, sporting events, high school events, concerts, community events. This place is going to be well programmed and well used. The lights will be on. With that, just some of the highlights, and I put these in the memo about the management agreement in terms of what I consider the major terms, conditions. Principal term of 21 years. The first year, it's just to kind of lock the operator in, but they're not able to play with it yet. So really, it's a 20-year lease with annual rent of $225,000. With that, the operator will contribute an additional $500,000 to the capital improvement fund. By the end of the lease, RDA will match that. Basically, we'll reserve parts of our payment so that by the time this lease ends, there'll be $1 million in the capital improvement fund. The operator will submit an annual operating plan to RDA. This is something that they've done in the other markets. Things where they talk about, alcohol, where they talk about, crowd management, safety, access, litter, neighborhood impact, and they'll be required to submit that annually to the RDA for their approval. With that, in the agreement, there's some listed minimum requirements for scheduled events. There'll probably be more, but at least just kind of a base level, wanted to give some indication of you need to be doing this number of events, so we're getting that place used. And I think a lot of the events that are contemplated in there, are the paid admission, events open to the public where you're going to have people, bigger crowds going in. In terms of, there's also going to be a lot of times where lights are on and people are there for practices and other community things. that are not part of this, but again, it gives that energy in terms of people down in that district. There's also opportunity for the RDA, the city, and Green Bay Neighborhood Leadership Council to have each 2 events in there. I think we're, the ability to use that as a community facility with those partners. I think there's been some additional discussion about on Broadway's participation and getting that facility used there as well. Operators responsible basically for the day-to-day ordinary maintenance of the stadium and the property around it. And then again, like our KI management agreement, we'd be responsible for some bigger capital improvements above 5,000. There's a little escalator in there to account for inflation, so that goes up to about 6,700 by the end of the lease. But those are the primary terms for that management agreement. So the other 2 pieces, development agreement for performance venue. So Chairman Meyer, this is where the indoor performance venue will go. One note, just when we get to this and voting on it, Mr. Scogan does have an LLC of which he'd like to basically enter into this development agreement. GBCV Acquisitions, which is in the agreement that was sent out. I just want to make sure Mark Scogan is the principal of that, but when we do come to voting on it, it's just a technical thing that we incorporate that into the agreement. So Mr. Scogan, for the performance venue, would basically look at the strip of land in the triangle between the railroad tracks, Broadway, and the main CN line in the back. And what he would do is look at putting his performance venue there. So basically you would have a great visual, good street frontage on Broadway, but then also on the backside, the ability to kind of use the waterfront. This, again, kind of gives a little bit of a breathing room in terms of the stadium site, and really, starts that development piece, moving further on South Broadway. I know initially we had talked about having all of this as just parking, but I think in terms of what this is providing here, it's going to be a new facility, a very sharp-looking facility. They're still going through some concepts, which will come back to RDA. But it also, starts to add in terms of really tying in Broadway and starting to make that connection amongst all these projects. So this development agreement, in this, the terms and conditions it contemplates, the RDA, which owns all those parcels right now, would convey those to Mr. Scogan for $1. They would make available, on a priority basis, 350 parking spots at the Badger Sheet Metal site. That's still an RDA or will be a public lot.
Is that in addition to the 900?
So no, that's included in there. So the 900 includes all the parking in this area. Mr. Scogan would like priority use of 350 spots on the Badger Sheet Metal site, and then the ability to use on an as-available basis another 350 in the area there. They would be responsible for submitting back to RDA, like we do most projects, concept plan, construction docs, and a budget to us for approval, and they would be looking at no less than $2 million in hard construction costs for that facility. Agreement says that it'll be done by December 1st of 2019. Pretty sure I won't speak out of turn for him, but if we move forward with it, it'll most likely be December 1, 2018. Mr. Scogan is very eager to get moving on this project, as probably been expressed through the news reports about looking at alternative options. We believe that presenting this option to him, and if this is approved and a go, that he will make this choice for moving forward. The last piece, which again I think there's still a little bit of work to do, which we could probably discuss in closed session, would be for a full-service restaurant. We've been working with Anduzzi's to basically take kind of that 8,000 square foot parcel that was identified in the concept plan to be an integrated part of the stadium, but also separate for taxing purposes. And that agreement contemplates a few things. We would do a long-term ground lease, so we'd still own the land underneath. I still think in terms of dividing properties here, it gets a little bit tricky with additional easements down the way. We would provide a pay-go TIF incentive. We would allow them to recoup 100% of their increment for 5 years. Basically is an opportunity to get that restaurant off the ground and move forward. Kind of the first years of restaurant business are the riskiest, and until this project gets moving and we have other development here. With that, backing up of a put option on the private improvements for 3 years. In short, what that would mean is that the city or the RDA would have the ability to purchase the restaurant in the first 3 years. It's kind of a mechanism of control that if in that first 3 years, for some reason the restaurant would not fulfill their obligations, the RDA would be able to secure it for the assessed value or cost of improvements, who then would work to basically replace it with another piece. We would also look at, again, for the parking, just available basis, at least 100 spots on the lot right there. I think would probably be more, probably close to 150. And then again, an additional 350 out of that mix. Just look, they would like access to do that. Most of those could be probably covered under the Mason Street viaduct there. So with that, same thing, developer would be on kind of the same timetable, responsible for submitting concept plan, construction docs, and a budget to RDA, no less than 1.5 million in hard costs, and again, be on track to complete this by December 1 of 2019. So, those are the 4 pieces. We brought them together as a package because these are really all intertwined. And I think in terms of, for especially, when we start talking about these secondary pieces for Mr. Scogan, for Anduzzi's, the restaurant, they're not going to come here unless the city commits to build the outdoor event center. And I think they've made that clear in both of their agreements and through their discussions that they need to make sure that the city and the RDA are invested in this area. They like us investing in the neighborhood and doing some other things, but they really need to make sure that building an outdoor event center, they're in this, for the long haul. And so I think just, again, in context of what we've been discussing, a few things. Again, impact on property values, and I'd like to share a little bit in closed session, some further discussion on interest in future development in this area. Again, we continue to work with a number of developers and users who have an interest in doing this site, and I'd like to discuss those a little bit more before they kind of make their case publicly. But if you look, we did the other time at the city deck, in terms of, again, here's a public amenity, a public facility that we're building to incent development. Come down. There's good opportunity here because we're investing in this area. We've got a long-term obligation, and with that, since City Deck, Flats and Fox, Watermark, City Deck Landing, Metro, we've added almost $32 million in terms of property improvement to that area. Our investment on the west side is, again, it's waterfront improvements, but it's this outdoor event center. And we feel, again, based on the discussions that we've had, that we could attract another $25, $30 million development in kind of that same time period. The other part, I think it's important not to forget, is the impact on residents and businesses. Our team went out there and talked to the businesses, talked to residents. The overwhelming majority of them felt like this is going to bring a positive impact to the neighborhood. They like the fact that there's going to be more people present, more eyes on the street. That always helps with crime and safety, and also just vibrancy in terms of making this a more attractive neighborhood, including bringing more families to the neighborhood. You look at individuals, millennials who may rent downtown, starting a family. Apartment may not be for them, but they're not really ready for a 2,500 square foot house with a quarter acre, half an acre lot. They still want to be close to the action. And so here we've got a great neighborhood. We're either buying a rehabilitated product or building a new product. Can bring that here. And again, just the overall improvement of the neighborhood and its image. This is an area that's kind of, doesn't have that image right now, except of being kind of lost and cut off and a little bit forgotten. And so I think, doing that, really is doing something good overall for that neighborhood. And this is just talking, about the immediate neighborhood right here. As you go further west into Tank Park and Seymour and further down 9th Street, there's a lot of other residual impact that comes from this as well. But then just finally, again, I think it goes back to this group has been very visionary when it comes to their impact on the community. And I think, what we've done here in the community, and again, these are just some of the major projects that in the last few years that we've worked on. Every great city has a lot of great neighborhoods and a lot of great districts. And where RDA has gone in terms of supporting development. Easttown, University Avenue, Old Main, Downtown, Legends, Military, Velp, just now more recently the rail yard. We feel this is the next piece in that puzzle to continue to keep us competitive. We are offering an amenity that nobody else in this region has. And for all the talk about competitive nature of retaining talent, I just New North Summit again last week. Workforce of all these jobs that are coming up, and we can't fill them. Look, we need to grow our population, and when people are choosing where to go, not only based on work but quality of life amenities, this is something that we feel they're going to look out and say, look, this kind of tips the scale in the city's favor. So, long-winded, but I wanted to put it all together in a package of here's where we're at today, and we would appreciate your support of these projects moving forward. I don't know, Mayor, if you wanted to say a few other things.
Well, what is before you is what we can do today. And, I've been at a lot of these meetings as you have, and they're not going to happen without each other. And I get that, right? The Scogan's not going without the outdoor event center. Full-service restaurants not coming in without Scogan. Kevin gave you construction costs, but, Scogan's investment's about $4 million in this, and Dewey's is about $3 million. That will design it to, the design obviously will come back here for the RDA approval. So those are and the investment from the city, the $1 million that we're going to invest into those 91 homes. So that's what we're voting on today, but I want to talk just a little bit more about the upside, okay, on what I'm hearing. I've been here a long time, and that property's been vacant for 30 years, and I will tell you that that corporate office that is a great employer in this community that hires millennials, you will see a letter in closed session that, look, if you guys do this and this becomes one of our top sites. You're going to see a letter from a high-end housing developer who likes the waterfront, and it's got almost this like Amsterdam look to it. It's just but he won't even look at that unless this happens. Just last night, I just want to share with you, I talked to a retired couple from Sturgeon Bay who would like to get more in the city and would love to buy one of these rental properties, rehab it, and live there. And because they got a dog, they want a yard, and I think that's exciting. I've got to be honest with you, had someone call me from Sturgeon Bay saying, look, I'd love to live, on Maple Street. It's exciting news. And then lastly, we had a visit last week, and I'll get this to you in writing, but have you ever seen the movie Ruby? Or Rudy?
Yeah. Rudy.
You never did? Right. He has a chain of restaurants called Walk-On, because he was a I never saw the movie, he was a walk-on under Notre Dame. And he was in Green Bay. The original Rudy was in my office last week looking at that triangle. And that would be just a great, he would have never come here had it not been for hearing about the outdoor event center, the indoor event center, the waterfront development.
Right.
And look, that's an upside, but I just want to explain to you that we have got interest in that property that we have never had. And I understand that that's a little speculative, but it's in writing.
Sure.
But none of that happens unless we move on these developments that are before you. And then, I think you guys heard me when I gave a talk last time. This is a connection, and we can connect the shipyard with the rail yard. And we're going out to DC to meet with CN, and we'd love to have a trolley car between the two that stops and takes people back and forth. And this is really going to change our city, but it's not going to start unless we make a move. And there's a window here, and you can talk to the investors that are here and now, but they have other communities chasing them too. I'm not the only mayor asking them to invest in our city, and Kevin. So I just really am, I just want to echo what Kevin said. There's a lot of work that's been in this. We've been at this for 2 years, and I think the time is now to move this forward on phase 1. And last thing, Kevin talked about the $12 million of public assistance. We're not going to the levy on this. This is all financed through the investment we have, through future investment, for the deal we put together with the bank, WIDA tax credits. We're not at the levy. This isn't a project. This is like the city deck, right? That was $12 million. No residential tax dollars in that. There was other entities that came in, and that's what we're looking at here in the statement in the shipyard district.
The concept is still pretty much the same where we would own the land, in all three projects, we continue to own the land?
So for the stadium itself, the Redevelopment Authority would continue to own the facility.
Yep.
Like KI,
Yep.
we would work with the operator to manage the facility.
Okay, great.
For the restaurant, we would look at a long-term ground lease and to provide an authority to do basically a long-term, 50-year ground lease for that piece.
Okay.
So we would still retain the land underneath,
Yep.
and retain some control. The restaurant would be responsible for the cost of, we would provide basically, look, here's a pad in which to build.
Mhm.
The restaurant would be responsible for constructing their improvements on the site. They would own the improvements
Right.
that are on
Okay.
there. So there's some that,
Yeah.
things that would have to be negotiated in the lease in terms of, all right, right of first refusal or transfer of the property. I think it's important that, and the city attorney can weigh in on this, that, again, just for our long-term interest, that the RDA does have some say, one, initially up front in terms of, the construction and the design of these facilities so that they're all complementing each other.
Right.
But also in terms of transfer to other uses, look, I can't predict what's gonna happen, 15, 20 years down the line, pinpoint, but that the RDA would be able to object if the proposed uses would be in conflict with basically kind of mission values of RDA or the objectives of what we're trying to do down there. Because, again, as the mayor said, these are all intertwined, and we don't want something to happen that really is going to be a detriment to the others. For Mr. Scogan's piece, we would sell that land for $1 free and clear warranty deed. So Mr. Scogan would own his improvements and the land below.
Good. Could you go back to that slide with the railroad tracks? There.
This one?
Yeah, so how much are these tracks still used?
So I have some counts on the numbers. The busiest track is the one right in the middle going left to right,
Yep.
which is north to south.
Sure.
That is part of CN's main line.
Okay.
I'm getting from engineering some updates on just the exact number of crossings and then what is recommended in terms of improvements. The siding or the spurs that come off there are still active. They're just a little less frequent. Basically, they're to serve Bay Valley foods.
Okay.
And really, they use the northerly one a lot and not the southerly
Okay.
one on there. But part of the deal would also be to look at, even if it's just some fencing on one side of the tracks, to direct people to cross, where there are crossings. Again, Bridge Street, Arndt Street, Mason Street, and potentially again at Clinton Street. I know the mayor, myself, our public works director have met with the local CN rep, and they're aware of this project. The regional office down in Chicago is aware of this project, and
As is the commissioner of railroads, we met with him
Right.
on this state.
So our goal is, look, if we can provide additional ways to cross, we're willing to work together to make these safe crossings.
That's
here.
important.
And they're supportive of this project too. We have the same goal in mind, and
Good.
we're confident with that.
Right. And I think, we look at, the question came out about, what about large events? We have very large events at Light Park right now. And again, there's really only one way in and out of Light Park that involves a railroad crossing. So again, I think we look at some of the same things, and we've discussed this with police and fire and our tech review team. And in terms of, this is almost a little better situation, because even though you still have to cross, there's multiple ways to get in and out of here, including, the ability to move to the north. And I think that's why it's important to have that trail along the western edge, the back end of the slip that connects those parcels. So
Right,
again,
right,
3, potentially 4 crossings in and
Yeah.
out of
Right.
this area.
Right, okay. Thanks, my question.
Any further questions? Joe?
So, Dr. Vonk, we talked this morning, maybe this needs to go to closed session for the actual numbers, but the concept, the design, the plan, and everything is great. I think the project is great, and I think that all the peripheral development that it will bring along is great. But do you have the numbers that will support the zero levy effect? That's going to be the most important thing, in my mind, is that this project can get done without being a burden on the taxpayers.
Sure. So assuming, again, conservatively, kind of worst case scenario, that we borrow at market rate, this is all a private project, and then it's either a bank borrowing or a bond. in that we do this 20 years amortized. We would need about $25 million worth of development by 2024, or $30 million of development by 2027 in order to keep this 100% off the tax levy. I know there's some things that I don't account for in there, and part of the discussion is about TIF incentives and what goes into a project. I think in this case, I mean, part of the incentive that we're providing is things up front, like waterfront amenities, parking, the outdoor event center in terms of, the ability to be located near something. With that, knowing that it's a riverfront site with historical fill, so if there is, it's probably going to be accounting for cost of any potential remediation or structural things that basically you need to get a building built. It is also does not account for right now any additional grants, loans, or other things that we basically would put in the pipeline to help defray that cost. I think once we kind of have a go, whether we're going, we still have, like I said, about 3 to 6 months before we have to pull the trigger on borrowing, which allows us to get additional funds. We're a finalist, more or less, for potentially a $1 million loan from WIDA out of their new market tax credit loan pool. So that could, again, provide some room for us to do interest only or potentially reduce that cost. And we've been talking actively with US EPA, the DNR, the Army Corps of Engineers, WEDC, I mean, others who are very much aware of this project, so I'm not accounting for any of those potential things in there. I'm also not accounting for anything, I think we discussed a little bit about other potential investors who may look at some the parking lots, maybe some naming right opportunities or changes to participate, like we do with the city deck, the Shopko Landing. I mean, they put in a facility or help, put in some funds to help account for cost of the park or a specific feature that is not accounting for any of those.
How about naming a stadium
as well.
itself? How about naming of the stadium itself?
So the stadium itself is under, would be an obligation of the operator in the management agreement. We talked about this, and I know it was discussed, and I can go in one more detail, closed session, about where I think preference for RDA or city having some rights in terms of the stadium name versus giving it to the operator. We had some pretty lengthy discussions on that. I will at least give you from a staff perspective. I am more comfortable with putting the burden of securing the naming rights on the operator in exchange for getting a consistent payment, lease payment, every year. I think one of the things that we discussed is, I mean, there's naming rights for the stadium, but there's also other pieces of the stadium. Boxes, clubs, I mean, other things that, look, just from a staff perspective, I don't know if that's the best use of our staff's time to be chasing down all of those things versus making it the obligation of the developer and for the operator. And look, you got to come up with those things because you've got a check due to us for $225 every year. It's up to you. If that's built in part of your pro forma, it's up to you to fill those gaps to do that. Sure. With that, I did discuss with Alden Moore and followed up with them that I think there's some other opportunities which aren't accounted for in here for naming rights as part of kind of the waterfront facilities or the slip itself, or maybe different parking lots as they're here. Sure. Could get sponsorships or named and could be the this company here type of lot.
Yeah, that's an option. The other option is development, and that's the option that I bet on. $24 million. You'll see today with the 3 people who are interested, it exceeds that. That neighborhood has been neglected for years, and if we would just take that neighborhood and bring it up to the average square foot price of Green Bay, and that, I mean, you're talking your district, and just the average, that would bring another $7 million of value to our city. Buying one of those duplexes and just bringing it up to the average price of real estate, and Smith Street where you are, we're not asking them to be, the west side or the east side. It's just that downtown neighborhood. And that's a large TIF district that you had us do. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity, and you got Brian's leadership down there, and it's not like we need $90 million of development. I think it's realistic for the city. The city deck delivered that, and from what I'm hearing, we didn't want to come here with a number, well, we need $100 million of development to make this work. That's just not the case. I mean, we're looking at $20–25 million of development. When this is the energy and all the studies you see of these people, these millennials and active retirees moving to walkable neighborhoods that are rehab, that have an image, this works. And then you throw the water in. I mean, this can work, but we would need that, and we're confident we can deliver that.
Well, it's a speculation project.
Right.
Well, I wear rose-colored glasses too. I see the best in it, but at the same time, I just have a responsibility to be cautious.
Yeah, it's really not as speculative as you think. I mean, you've got 3 projects here and now to vote on.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Before we vote, Kevin, I'd like to thank you for your very comprehensive report. Explained a lot of questions that we may have had, and that's great. So we're ready for a motion then on...
We need to go to closed session?
No, just for the last one.
Yeah, if you want, I don't know.
I
if you
thought we
want
were
to open
going
the
to do
floor
these
before.
two...
Well, yeah, I'd like to open the floor maybe before we go to closed session in case some items come up that we need to discuss.
Good point. Good point, Joe.
I'd make a motion to open the floor for public comment.
Second it.
Motion by Joe, second by Melanie, then to open the floor for public comment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Guy?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First of all, I just have some basic questions. What's before you today, how is this different than what we've approved already? Just a few details?
So RDA approved the initial development agreement. That went to council. Council added contingencies that this project come back with both an agreement for the indoor performance venue and a restaurant be locked up by the end of the year. So that's why that's coming back. And then the development agreement, the price of the additional improvements for parking and waterfront has increased from 1.5 to 4 million. So there's additional money going into the project. So that is what has changed from then till now. Also the concept of...
That's on the dotted line?
What's that?
That's on the dotted line?
Yes, so, and then the
I mean,
pieces...
where are those documents?
Those documents were sent out to you over the last few days in terms of the amended development agreement.
Mr. Vonk, the evening before last, you sent one document, quite a few pages, and last night, late last night, you sent one. I haven't had a chance to even study it. But I think, and has the committee? Has the redevelopment?
I have.
You studied it in detail?
Yes,
Well,
yes.
I guess I'd like a breakdown of that.
Sure, and that's what I just did with the presentation of the...
Your presentation didn't talk
Let him
anything about
speak.
money.
Pardon? The development agreement in terms of the additional costs, I went through and explained the additional costs of the waterfront improvements, the acquisition and doubling the parking spaces from 400 to 900, the management agreement, terms and stipulations, and this goes back to what we've been discussing for quite some time in terms of the major terms and conditions on that. And then the last two with Mr. Scogan and for Anduzzi's, the last two, so the development agreement was sent out on Friday, the management agreement, and Mr. Scogan's was sent out Saturday, Sunday, and then the last piece with Anduzzi's, which I sent a confidential copy because we're still negotiating, that is the one that was sent out last night. And I sent it to both RDA, but also sent it to council members with the opportunity that if we're not going to meet until next week, that there's still at least a week to review before you needed to vote.
How were
on
those
it.
documents put together? Just with staff, basically, and the people?
Yeah, so those documents are the result of basically 2 years of negotiations. We had some closed sessions here this summer, I think it was July or August, where we talked about kind of where the status of all those things were. Must have been June or July, because then at council, we had a closed session where we kind of discussed the status where those were in August, and basically kind of gave us direction to complete those. We brought a package together in October. The package then that went to council. Council said, look, we want it all. We want basically the restaurant and the indoor performance venue locked up by the end of the year. So that is what has been brought back here today.
Okay, so the whole committee is aware of all the details of each aspect of this, each piece of this?
That is correct. I mean, I can't make them read them, but made it a goal to make sure that they had plenty of time to review before this meeting, that it wasn't just dropped on their desk here today.
Well, if you think we've had plenty of time to review it, you're sadly mistaken. You just gave emails to us in the last few days.
With the documents, emails with the documents.
Doing what you asked to be done.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd like those things talked about in detail. Because one of the things I talked about at our last Redevelopment Authority meeting was, I'm looking for the project to pay for as much of itself as it can. And unlike the presentation, I'm not opposed to the city making a contribution.
Then make
As a
that
city
motion,
amenity.
guy. You say that all the time and you vote no anyway.
Mr. Chairman, will you please stop
Well, just
Mr.
if he
Schmidt
wants
from
the city to
interrupting
put money
me?
into it, have him
This
make
is
the
a guy who
motion.
wants to interrupt everything you're
This
saying.
guy's
Now,
gonna
will you
vote
be
no no matter what you
quiet?
say. Just
Will
trying
you
to
be-
save your time.
Will you be quiet? Well, save your time. Save your time by being quiet. But, Mr. Chairman, I had asked at that time, as part of the management agreement, they talked about, well, they were going to pay $225,000 a year instead of $100,000 a year, but they were going to be given the naming rights. I felt since the large majority of the investment is being put forward by at least the risk to the taxpayers of Green Bay, that at least the city of Green Bay should be the beneficiary 100% of those naming rights. And we should be out seeing how much interest is there for naming rights so we can add that to the project. Then I also asked about the concessions, the parking revenues. Those are all things. Is the city going to get a piece of it? The answer I got from Mr. Vonk at that time was, well, the parking, well, it would go to the bullfrogs on Bullfrog days, and then, well, we'd have to figure out what it'd be for the rest of it. Well, are those details all put together?
So as far as
is that part of the agreement?
As far as the naming rights go, we discussed that with the operator. Both the operator and the staff are not interested in moving what is contemplated in the management agreement. The operator not only, and I think what we just talked about here, is that, yes, the operator will be able to secure naming rights for the stadium. That not only includes stadium naming rights, but any other things inside, which requires a decent amount of work. And in terms of guaranteeing a particular value, it is in staff's best interest to have a secure, identified payment every year instead of trying to work through and figure out, all right, what piece of this should we get, what piece of that should we get. It is much cleaner for us just to have a lump sum payment that we know and we can depend on. Therefore, yeah, the developer or the operator gets some upside potentially if their revenues exceed their payment, but they also inherit the risk of if they are not able to follow through on naming rights like they expected or concessions like they expected, they still owe us that lease payment. And I believe it is in the taxpayer's best interest or the city's best interest to have a secured payment or value that we can count on every year. The operator is not interested in changing those terms, and at this point, neither is staff in terms of their recommendation.
That's what makes this work, is the least secured payments. That's what makes it work.
Well, I find that a canard. But,
Mr. Chairman, why don't you ask about the canard with the $91 million Expo Hall that he supported and what the naming rights are for that?
I'll just go on here. I'd like to remark about the comments that were made that the neighborhood has been neglected. The neighborhood has been improved, not that it doesn't need more improvements. I would like to see more improvements, but we have done over the past 10 years many improvements using the neighborhood enhancement funds. And I find this presentation that the neighborhood enhancement funds are somehow only coming in because of this project is totally bogus. Those neighborhood enhancement funds are available right now to anybody who would want to make a proposal. And we have acquired and torn down houses and put townhouse projects in there. There have been a lot of improvements, and I'd like to see more. And so I'm not at all opposed to it. But I really think it's a bit disingenuous to say that those neighborhood enhancement funds are somehow part of the project that's going to be paid for through the TIF revenues that are in there. That's a totally separate affair. And those improvements are going to continue over time regardless of this project. Now, that said, I'm not opposed to the project if a majority of it, I'm not even saying all, a majority of it can be covered by known revenues. Because we have people, because I guess I'm interested, the rest of Broadway, down to 9th Street, what monies are available with this project through folks who might want to make some improvements there, outside of neighborhood enhancement funds, which are available right now?
For those properties, we have right now a few items. This corridor has been identified as part of our EPA Brownfields grant that we received, $350,000, Matt, here. $350, is that what we got? $300,000 in terms of being able to go in and help with phase 1, phase 2 site assessments, so we can find out what's there and help the property owner address the problem. We have some block grant money set aside in our facade and demo grants to allow for those improvements to the facade or demolition. Again, the products that you just mentioned in terms of neighborhood enhancement for residential or home funds, potentially being available for the project. But I think also part of the discussion, going back to when we first voted on this at council, is that the city, JRB, create a tax increment district, basically that spans the area from Ashland to the river, Arndt or Bridge Street, all the way down to 9th Street. So depending on the project, tax increment financing could be a part of the program. And again, I mean, tax increment financing, I think this body well knows that every project depends on, basically how much value is there right now and how much value is going to be creating at the end. And we have a history, I think, of being involved in projects to get them off the ground, because without TIF, they don't happen. But I think we've also been very fair in terms of the amount that we're willing to put into these projects, and.
But just so I understand, there's a brownfield grant of $300,000 that can be made available to anyone who might want to do something with the project to help them with the cleanup of their soil.
Right now, it is just for assessment. We are in the process of
Would you
applying
explain
to
that?
get. Sure. So right now, you can go in. We have a contract with a consultant to go in and do phase 1 and phase 2 studies, which basically goes through historical records to figure out, all right, was there anything potentially that could contaminating here? If they find through all these record search that there is, and they go in and actually do testing. And we did a phase 1 and phase 2 with the properties that we picked out. The cycle shop right there just south of Clinton and Broadway. And we found out, look, there was some petroleum hits there.
I guess I'm talking about
so,
south of the bridge.
Yeah, and that can be done anywhere throughout the Broadway corridor. I mean, it can really be done anywhere throughout the city. We can do it anywhere throughout the city. With our grant, we've identified our core areas of we want to work on Broadway, Velp, and University, because those are 3 areas we know have a lot of brownfields, and you can see how we've used some of those funds in University as being into.
So I understand there's $300,000 available for phase 1 and phase 2 assessments of
correct.
Anybody's property who might want to do something with it.
Correct. They can come to the
Okay.
city, and again, what we like to do, because those
You don't have
phase
to
1 and
explain
phase
the
2
project.
have a shelf life, we like to do it when there's a project coming down the pipeline, because they're only good for about 6 months to a year, so it doesn't pay for us to do one if there's no project. But if there's a project in the works, we are willing to work with our consultant to put those under consideration, yes.
And then did you say the second thing was that there were storefronts?
So we have
Grants?
a facade and demo grant that we use some of our black grant money, puts into a fund. It's a matching fund where we allow for funds to be put in from both the developer and this grant in order to take buildings down and or improve facades. The recent one we just approved is, I'm blanking on the address, Main Street, 901? The old Centerfold Lounge and Jake's Pizza, which I think Jeff showed coming down right now. We put some money in, $10,000 for each of those buildings. With that, if we're going to take something down, we need a project that's going to come back. So we've been able to help partner to get blight out of the way if we know that something's going to be developed coming back.
Okay. What monies, if any, are put aside for, and made available for streetscaping of South Broadway, south of the bridge?
So I don't know the exact date of when South Broadway was reconstructed, but I know a lot
It was just a
of,
few years ago.
attention was put into what was done with the street itself. I know the bike lanes and then the pedestrian accommodations. In terms of additional streetscaping, that is something that we've looked at, could potentially be part of this project. But I feel some of those things, like we've looked in other tax increment districts, those come after the development and after we have reserves in a tax increment district sufficient enough to fund them. Like we talked about for University Avenue, yeah, streetscaping, parks, other things like that are good, but we're not going to spend money on those particular things first until we have a balance in the TID account.
Until you have a balance in the TID account. At what point does excess TIF money become available beyond the projects? We haven't seen the details except what you sent to us, and I would hope that we're going to have good discussions about that. But what's available?
It would depend on...
Beyond what's available right now?
Nothing, because there is no TID
Okay.
right now.
The two projects that are talked about here,
Mm-hmm.
the three if you want to call it that, what would that generate for the rest of Broadway?
At this point, their revenues from the increment would be going in to pay for the improvements that we're contemplating here. That is why we need additional development beyond.
Okay, so if there's no additional development, there is no other TIF money available for the rest of Broadway?
Correct.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
Just like it is now.
All right. The traffic out of the stadium, is Clinton Street the main exit that you're talking about?
So traffic will come out, and that is one of the things we've discussed about how many people we want parking on the other side of the tracks, both on the parcel and under South Mason. The primary point of ingress-egress for that parking will be underneath South Mason Street. With that, the Badger sheet metal site will provide some additional parking a little further away and perhaps different ingress-egress routes.
Do you have a parking map that you could show us?
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces of the operator plan is that they will be required in their annual operating plan to have basically an access plan that shows how they're going to get both walkers, bikers, and drivers in and out of this facility for major events. And I think they can discuss how they manage doing this both on site, but also working with private property owners whose lots they may use for a particular event to get people in and out safely.
Basically what I see is that you can go North Broadway, you can go South Broadway, you can go out Clinton.
Correct.
If you go out Clinton, that's the one that's most obvious, it's the one that's in front of you. You come to Ashland Avenue. Ashland Avenue, I mean, today, I travel that street very much myself, almost every day. And when I get to Ashland Avenue, it's a very difficult crossing for one car. You gotta wait for traffic to stop and everything else the other way and look for a spot to sneak in. Obviously, that couldn't, some kind of signal would be needed at that area to handle so that traffic could go north or south on Ashland Avenue. Is that figured in here anywhere?
It is not. It could potentially be figured, but I think part of the management plan would be also looking at, and we've discussed with Public Works, how you get people in and out of there. I don't think we would direct people down Clinton Street for an exit, just because of that very fact of, again, turning left to go south out of there is complicated because there is no signal there. So we would direct people north on Broadway to take Walnut, or south on Broadway either to hop on Mason Street and take that back to the east side, or go down to 9th Street or Liberty where there's controlled intersections with Ashland Avenue. So I think that is part of the plan in terms of dispersing crowds after games. And also
going north on Broadway to take left on Walnut, that's a very complicated affair too.
Drivers are creatures of habit, and they'll usually figure out ways they like to go.
It's okay for 5, 10, 15 cars.
Well, I don't think we're going to discuss and solve the traffic problems today.
You have to have, everybody knows that at any stadium, you have to have a good basic ingress and outgress.
That's not our job.
Well, you need to consider those things before you can talk about projects.
Yep, and I think as required as part of the operating plan, they'll be required to submit a plan that shows how they get that many cars in and out of there safely. given what we have right now. If they're not able to achieve that, then we have to look at the operating plan and either look at ways of changing that operation plan. Not every piece of this puzzle involves infrastructure. There's also ways to manage and operate things in a way that allow it to go more efficiently and probably more cheaply than a piece of infrastructure, like a stop and go signal.
Okay.
Who cleans the property? Is it totally clean now? I mean, there has been some work done by the Fox River cleanup and that, but what is the estimate of cleaning up the property to do the project?
Cleaning in terms of environmental remediation? Yes. Sure. So as far as the PCBs that are in the slip, the Fox River Cleanup Authority, we work with them. They'll be removing all the PCBs out of that slip, so they will all be gone. With that, part of the process of taking out those PCBs, it's going to cause that wood wall, that retaining wall on the south side, basically to collapse. So they are going to replace that wall with riprap all along the shore from basically the end of the slip all the way to the Fox River. So with that, they will be stabilizing that wall, and one of the parts of the agreement is that we can have no net land loss there. So we've got a parcel, certain acres. When they go in, take out the PCBs, put it back into place. That outline we have right now in terms of the acreage of the site will be exactly the same as it was before. If you go over there right now, they're almost, I think, complete with that project, but it will allow us that space, and basically we're going to have a stable condition along that area. As far as the rest of the environmental remediation, we're working right now, I think, on the remediation action plan. Is that correct? I'm just looking at our Matt, who's Mr. Buchanan, has been working on this in our team. So we've had active conversations with our brownfields consultant, the DNR, and EPA in terms of what needs to be done there right now. We have put together, or in the process of putting together, that action plan. Part of it depends on what you build and where you build the stadium and where you build the parking lot. But through our initial conversations and concept plans of where we're going to put these things, we feel that we can do the remediation there. It's basically historic fill from old coal piles and some petroleum being there. Can work with it on site, that we don't need to move it off site, which is the expense that really starts to crank up fast. And so we're able to either cap it through the parking lot or the stadium itself, or reuse it on site in terms of some landscape berms on site. So we don't anticipate, while we don't have a final number, that will be an exorbitant cost. But in that $9.5 million, we have quite a substantial estimate for site work, groundwork, environmental remediation in that number.
Could you review that number again?
Part of the work involves still yet designing the facility. So, but we're not going to design the facility, because to design the facility will probably be about $500,000. The operator has said that they would be willing to contribute that as part of their $1 million contribution in terms of fronting some of the design costs. But they're not willing to do that unless the city and the RDA are willing to commit the stadium, because they are not going to want to build or expend their resources on a plan of something that's never going to get built. I would argue the same thing even if the city or RDA were doing it, that we would not go forward with an approval to spend $500,000 on design plans that would start to look at some of these things in terms of the geotechnical and the environmental, unless we're going to build it. $500,000 is a lot just to throw away on something that we're not going to.
Well, Dr. Vonk, we've known that for 2 years. That's a given. I'm not here to quarrel about that. I guess I'm just trying to understand what's the high and low end of environmental cleanup depending on what happens.
Environmental cleanup, along with, I would say, site preparation work in terms of dealing with historical fill. Just off the top of my head, could be $3 million.
That's a high end?
Potentially. Look, I think in terms of diving into the details, until we get there, we budgeted a lot for it.
You said we might be able to cap it and not have some of those expenses.
Correct, but we don't know, we can't get those numbers until we know what it's going to look like and where we're going to put the fill and do some of those things. So in terms of trying to predict what we're gonna do with it. We don't know what we're gonna do with it yet, so we don't know where exactly, you know, the dugout's going to be. We don't know exactly how the parking lot's gonna be configured. So until we know some of those things, we can't price out how much it's going to cost to remediate and or stabilize.
Roughly know those things?
We feel that that $9.5 million is able to cover all of that.
So, but the high end of it is 3 million, you think? Or is that the average?
That is, I'll put out there as my best educated estimate where we are at this point, given the preliminary discussions.
Okay, thank you. Again, I will go back to we talked about the other revenue sources. When anybody builds a stadium, what do they look at? The obvious things that you can make money from. And of course, it's concessions and parking, as well as admissions.
Guy, we've already addressed that.
You've
The other revenues would be part of the total increment that they're gonna pay us every year on an annual basis.
Does that include
We don't wanna be
does that
involved in
park-
day-to-day revenues for each concession stand.
Okay, I just want to make it clear. Does that include
Yes.
parking and all concession revenues?
Yes.
So they will get all the parking revenues, all the concession
Just like you
revenues?
did with PMI,
All-
yes. Yep, that's
Oh,
exactly
well,
what's in the agreement we sent you.
Well, PMI isn't exactly a...
You voted for it.
Okay?
right.
Will you protect me from harassment here, Mr. Chairman? I'm
I'll protect
addressing
them.
the staff, I'm not addressing the mayor, I'm addressing you folks. I'm very interested in the details of the plans of Anduzzi's, Skogan, and I guess, you know, I've been kind of pulling teeth here, but it's from if what I understood is correctly, all revenues on the project will go to the manager,
And what makes the project
under the
work-
management agreement, is that correct?
And what makes the project work is the guaranteed lease payments.
Well, all the concessions, all the parking, all the naming rights
Well,
go
that
to
you gotta
guarantee,
get-
a $225,000 a year payment?
Right.
Wow. And that's for other events, all events, or just Bullfrog events?
They will be able to recoup revenues for any event they have at the stadium.
Well, that is a rather unfriendly fee, $225,000.
What do you base that on?
So-
Somebody should ask him, what does he base that on?
Uh,
You don't know
Look,
anything about this.
You're on, yeah, you're the
I
great,
mean, what are you
you're the
basing
great genius.
that on? What are you basing that on, guy? That $225,000, we'd be better off with
Well,
concessions?
Mr. Chairman, this thing is being flung on us over a 2-3 day
Over a
period.
2 or 3 year period.
We have, the Redevelopment Authority should understand something. The city council has approved everything so far that's come before it. We have yet, until now I think, we have not received a single proposal from anybody other than the management company that, I guess, wants everything for their $225,000 a year. I don't think that's in the best interest of the community. I think that is a very ultra sweetheart agreement. And if I hear this one more time, that, oh, it's guaranteed. Well, it's like I build apartments and I'm getting a guaranteed $200 a month, and I want that $200. Well, is that really what I want? And so I guess I'm looking at what they're willing to invest, what taxes will be generated, and how much of that tax will be available for something other than their own project over the next 25 years. Is there really any money generated? You've said no. You said no. So for like 20, 25 years, there's no money from what I guess is going to be before us for anything else. And what's talked about in neighborhood enhancement, I feel is just a red herring. That money is available regardless. It has nothing to do with this project.
Well, Guy, we have to move on.
Well,
Have a seat.
I'll be waiting to hear the details,
All right.
described to us in detail of what they're proposing to do, what they're going to produce in tax revenues, and how much of it is guaranteed back into the project. and how much is left over for other amenities in the community. Thank you very much.
Anyone else want to speak?
Just to follow up on
Yeah.
Mr. Zimma's point about what the operator will contribute, I think it's
Right.
made clear that they will put $1 million, talking about a $9.5 million stadium. They will put $1 million in upfront in terms of equity, and we talked about design or construction, but either way, it will come out to $1 million. Over the term of the lease period, they will put an additional $4.5 million into the facility, and part of the agreement also says they'll put another $500,000 into a capital reserve. So of that $6 million that they will be contributing to this
Very good job.
facility.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add, we compared this to other stadiums that they operate. The city is getting a very good deal
Right.
with that management agreement. And we reviewed that, we discussed it, we've done the comparisons, and this is very fair.
Like speak?
Yep, my name is Joe Arts. My wife and I own and operate Our Place Family Restaurant. We're located at 519 South Broadway. I don't see our address listed, but that was the concern of coming here today, because we were wondering what was going to happen to us. We're kind of in the middle there, where the building, well, we'd be next to Scoggins plans. The city already owns the building south of us, and so I'm just, concerned what if there was a future. We want to make sure we're going to be here yet and not torn down. When things come up like this, you hear rumors and stories and people telling you that we're going to be parking lot and all this stuff, and so that was my concern today, to make sure that, like I said, I don't see our address listed.
Sure.
So,
Well, I just, we could set the record straight. I think probably met your.
yeah, you were in our restaurant once.
When we were in the restaurant. Look, you're a successful business down there. That works. I think, offline, we would like to discuss about, potentially having the RDA or the city have a first right of refusal on your property should you decide to sell. But look, you're a neighborhood establishment, you work well there, we're gonna be doing some things around you, hopefully that generates business for your place, but in terms of any, for us, you're not included in the proposal because, we'd like you to stay as you are. If you want to talk about something, and as Mr. Zimma said, in terms of making improvements to the project or things that would increase the value of the property, once we have a tax increment district set up there, we could look at having funds to do some of that for your property. But you're a piece of the neighborhood, and there's no reason to move or do anything else with that property at this point. So, I mean, that's why it's not a part of it, because there's, the only thing we would like to do, like I said, is perhaps, have a first right of refusal, so you should decide to sell down the line. Let us have a kick at it before somebody else does.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
And so what is planned for the 525, 531? Are you tearing them down, or?
So our goal would be to, correct. So to the north of you, Mr. Scogan would build his concert venue. The property we acquired to the south of you, the old cycle shop, we would look at tearing that down, potentially putting some parking there, which would be public parking. It would be used, priority on game days for events, but otherwise it would be public parking that would be open. That is also the area where long-term we would like to have an extension of Clinton Street, go over and provide an additional crossing to the facility. And so that way there'd be, as you come down Clinton, you can see the facility, maybe like some type of plaza feature. It may not be a full vehicular access, but at least pedestrian bicycles being able to cross there and get to that facility.
Well, that was a few years ago. The railroad actually came to us and asked us about that triangle area if we were interested in buying it. So
the triangle where the billboard is, or the triangle on the left-hand side?
Triangle where the tracks are.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if you guys talked to them about parking there.
So, yes, so the triangle on the far left side, between Arndt, Broadway, and...
No, the triangle of the tracks, basically, like Broadway and then the two sets of tracks there.
The what park? Oh, that triangle right there.
Yeah,
yes.
They talked to us once.
Yeah, so the city owns
back.
like a tiny little parcel where the left-hand tracks cross. But that has also been part of our discussions with CN to see, and I think it goes in with that, and we talked about building pieces. Look, I don't think it's any secret, long-term, the city is interested in acquiring the old intermodal yard and other properties that they don't use. So in terms of this piece, at minimum, being able to use for some additional green space or parking, that just can help to enhance the area. But that is part of our kind of laundry list of things, talking with the railroad, that we'd like to see happen there.
All right, well, thank you.
Dr. Bonk, business be eligible for some of those grants? I mean, they're eligible for them now, right? If they wanted
Correct.
Facade grants or anything?
I believe, I gotta look, but I think that South Broadway's in the map area. I'm almost pretty sure that the whole Broadway district is eligible for some of those things, demo facade that can help with that. And again, the goal is, I mean, with that tax increment district and other tools, is to provide tools to all the businesses in that area to help them grow.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to talk?
Yes.
Yes?
I'm Sue Robinson. My business address is 821 South Broadway. I've also been a business owner down there now for 27 years. And I agree with him that we feel we're getting conflicting stories about everything from everywhere, and a lot of us in that area are feeling very in the dark a lot about what's happening. We hear things about the help with facade improvements and things like that, but I don't think many of us know how to apply for these things or get rolling on this kind of stuff. And I've been talking to some of the business owners, and we were wondering if maybe once you get through your voting into that, if maybe the mayor or someone from the committee, if we could get together and have a meeting with the business owners down there so we could get these questions answered and feel a little more informed about the project.
Yeah, I think,
good idea.
yes. You know, our team tried to do some initial outreach. I know we didn't hit all the businesses in that area.
I mean, I know we got a little questionnaire and people popped in, but again, between the news and different councilmen and all this, we're getting so many different stories, and we get it's confusing.
Kevin, if I could just, Sue, you know, we've met with, of course, the Tavern League, and I know we've talked with you. That is part of that would be a next step, but we don't want to go in with, I know there's a lot of rumors, and I don't know what you're hearing from the aldermen, but we will give you a complete package once we have one to present to you. So
if we wanted to start now looking at some of these facade grants and that, we could start now applying?
Yeah, I think in terms of contacting our office, as far as eligibility for that, I think we still have some funds, or we'll be reallocating some funds into that, I think, as part of our next block grant cycle. And I think that's one of the things that we're working on, just our office, to put together a package of all our programs, I mean, for the whole community, but especially in this targeted area. Again, with that, the tax increment provides another source of that district. You know, if you're investing money that ultimately, you know, will result in higher property value, look, the trade-off is you might pay more taxes, but if we can use some of those to incent you to do things that you wouldn't have otherwise done, I mean, that benefits both of our parties. And I think, as you've discussed, you know, if approvals for this move forward, I think it's incumbent upon us to have two meetings. One, to meet with the neighborhood to talk about the programs there, but then also with the business owners in terms of other ways we can help. I think it's very important, I think we've talked about here in other communities, you know, just rumors that come up and gentrification and other things that happen. I mean, our goal is to provide tools to owners, residents that are there now, that if they want to basically, you know, take advantage of the rising tide, that they're able to do that. And so I think just to be clear in terms of what we're presenting today, and the properties that are mentioned, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, we're purchasing, you know, Badger sheet metal. We already own most all of these properties. You know, we're not interested in going in and picking out other things at this time.
So basically, we're hashing out details now, but the stadium is approved and going forward.
Not yet. That is what we are asking for from RDA today, is approval of basically build the stadium, manage the stadium, have Mark Skogan build his venue, and have Anduzzi's build those venue. That's what's before RDA today, and will be forwarded to council on the 19th.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? As for motion return, we're going to go to business.
So moved.
Motion by Gary, second by Joe. Those in favor say aye. Opposed. What I'd like to do is take numbers 2 and 3 and vote on those now, and then there's a possibility of a closed session for number 4. We can take that separately. We have to have a motion on both.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything, I would recommend just, if there's anything you want to talk about any of these?
I'd like to go in.
Details?
Yeah, I think I'd like to go into closed session, actually.
Before
Before we vote on anything.
On 2 and 3?
Just on all of them.
On all of them.
All of them.
Okay. All right. So, Matt, you're the designated reader of the closed session agreement.
The authority may convene a closed session pursuant to section 19.85, subsection 1, subsection E, Wisconsin statutes for purposes of deliberating or negotiating the sale of public properties, investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business as necessary for competitive or bargaining reasons. The authority may thereafter reconvene in open session pursuant to section 19.85, subsection 2, Wisconsin statutes to report the results of the closed session and consider the balance of the agenda. And this would be for items 2, 3, 4, and 5.
So, motion?
We need a motion?
Second.
Motion by Gary, second by Jim, and Kevin will call the roll.
Harry Meyer?
Yes.
Gary Delvaux?
Yes.
Jim Bloomer?
Yes.
Alderman Joe Moore?
Yes.
Melanie Karma?
Yes.
Matt Shule?
Yes.
Bring a gallon.
Cheryl's got tea.
I keep seeing it. Traded the new season cups at McDonald's. They're like a real thick wall.
No, not yet.
We were at the galley and she was there. Yeah, she was actually
17 minutes. 3 hours, 57 minutes.
Yeah, but I guess. Going good.
He did state for the past like just 3-4 years. Yeah, he hasn't done anything.
Oh, is that right?
Right, yeah, he's just.
Challenge will be whether or not I can read them again. That's what my handwriting's not very good. Your challenge. Press is it? 17 weeks, 2 hours, 56 minutes.
Draft.
You can get it wrong for the section.
Would you send a letter to this gal and tell her we don't give contributions or that, but she could apply for CDBG funding? Yeah. Say it's reference to the letter she sent to me. That'd be very efficient.
Once I had a closed session, I pulled home the hair out. You too, Matt. About 5 days ago. Yeah. I usually only go about 3 days and then I get it again. It's getting long. But I used to I should say longer. I use the Gillette Mach 5.
I would like to report to the public that during the closed session, the members of the RDA, the staff, and other city officials had rather lengthy and detailed discussion on the various development agreements with the entities involved with the shipyard development project. And we'll be going back to regular order of business, and we'll give you a information then on what action we took involving the 4 development agreements that were facing us.
Can you take roll? Go back in.
Kevin,
Okay.
asked.
So back into open session.
Call,
Yep.
roll call.
Harry Meyer?
Yes.
Gary Delvaux?
Here.
Jim Bloomrick?
Yes.
Alderman Joe Moore?
Yes.
Melanie Karma?
Yes.
Matt Shule?
Yes.
Okay, so fully back in open session.
Okay, I'm going to make the motion then, that on item number 2.
Hold on, can you take up item number 2 first and then you can
Okay.
To which?
take up item number 2 and then tell me.
Okay.
I can't do anything, Harry.
Yeah, yeah, bow down. We'll take up item number 2 then for the first action.
So I would make a motion, and we'll go through items 2, 3, 4, and 5 here in sequence. On item number 2, the development agreement, that we would prove that subject to an amendment in section 5B, where we change the language from and to or. On item number 3, which is the management agreement for the outdoor event center, that we would approve that agreement subject to amending section 5, amending section 7 in the language on tax exempt financing to in the event. Number 4, the development agreement for the Skogan Indoor Performance Venue, that we would approve that agreement with no changes.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to propose a change that agreement, instead of being marked Skogan, that agreement be with GBCV Acquisitions LLC, which is the Wisconsin Limited Liability Company, of which Mark Skogan is the principal.
Thank you, that was on the tip of my tongue. So in the language, as mentioned, right, as the LLC, that we would approve that agreement with no other changes. And on item number 5, the development agreement with Anduzzi's, we would approve that agreement subject to striking section 3.5 from the agreement.
I'll second that.
All right, you've heard the motion and the second then on the action involving the 4 development agreements. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Very good. I want the public to know that few and or ors sounds like we didn't do a lot, but it took a lot to arrive at that decision. Number
The mayor and Kevin, the whole team. We have
all this time.
Bill gets to talk and everyone leaves.
Number 6, consideration of possible action.
Thank you.
I request that everyone wants to pay for approval of $10,000 of home funding to rehabilitate and resell 716 Kellogg Street.
All right. This is a request that we received from NeighborWorks. It is a property on the west side. NeighborWorks had it as one of their rental properties. They actually have 2 properties there. They tore down the house. There was a house behind that was torn down. Part of this request is going to be, I believe, said is to build a two-stall garage. A two-stall garage behind this structure on the parcel that they tore down. The requested funds are $43,100 for home funding, and then a $2,500 for closing costs for homeowner assistance closing costs, a total of $45,600. And what their plan is to rehab the property and put it on the market and sell it to a single-family homeowner. So it would go back on the tax rolls.
Is that place vacant now?
It is vacant right now. It was a property that they were renting out. It's not currently on the tax rolls, but they would be rehabbing the property, selling it to a homeowner, and then placing it back on the tax rolls.
You got a buyer?
Oh, no, they got to rehab it.
Right.
So that's what they're requesting.
Okay.
We like it.
Do you have any ideas for what they would sell it for?
100,000.
Oh, I'm sorry?
About 100,000.
That's correct. Yes, 100,000.
I make a motion to approve the request of NeighborWorks being paid for approval of $45,600 of home funding to rehab and resell 716 Kellogg Street.
Right, you heard a motion, we carry a second by Jim. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Ask for a motion on approving the bills.
We have item 7.
Item 7, and hiding in there, Harry.
Oh, that kid.
It's Kevin.
Oh.
Kevin again. We have number 7, consideration possible action on the request for a short sale of 1137 South Greenwood Avenue. Kevin is making an appearance.
I am. Thank you very much, and thanks for all your good work. The homeowner at this address has requested a short sale. They put their house on the market. They got a low offer, and the bank approached us and asked us if we were willing to take a short sale position, and I informed them of the protocol here. They're requesting a reduction of $2,500 in debt for us to, so they would pay us $2,500. The loan is $5,000 in down payment assistance, and they would ask that we write off the balance or forget the balance. I did not hear from the homeowner. I requested contact. I did not get word back from the homeowner. The bank has informed me that if we don't take the deal, they're pretty much walking away. So it's going into foreclosure. so 2,500, bird in the hand.
So you recommend we go for it?
Yes, sir.
So move. Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Matt, those in favor say aye.
Aye. Okay, also, this form I created, I don't know if you got a chance to read that, but I think it's pretty handy, and if you have any suggestions for that, that would be nice.
You did that?
Yes, sir.
Well done.
Those in favor say aye.
Took me 2
Aye.
miles.
Carried. Ask for a motion on the bills.
Editable PDF.
You see, yes, Melanie?
I make a motion to approve the bill.
I can second.
Motion by Gary, second by Melanie to approve the bills as outlined. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those carried. We're gonna skip informational. All right?
All right.
Could I just ask a question?
We're adjourned.
But I'm not gonna ask where the rest of the RDA can hear, this will be my own private.